Every philosophy that has ever changed the world began somewhere specific. Buddhism began under a fig tree in northern India, where a young prince sat down and refused to move until he understood the nature of suffering. Christianity began in a carpenter's workshop in Nazareth, and then on a road to Damascus, where a man was knocked from his horse by something he could not explain. And Stoicism, the philosophy that shaped Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus and Cato, the philosophy that has run through every episode of this channel from the beginning. Stoicism began in the wreckage of a merchant ship, somewhere in the Mediterranean, around 300 BC. A man lost everything he owned, and in losing it, he found something that would outlast every empire, every dynasty, and every fortune that existed in his world. His name was Zeno. He was a merchant from Cyprus, and his shipwreck is not just the origin story of a philosophy, it is the most important financial story this channel has ever told. Because embedded in what happened to Zeno, in the loss, in the response to the loss, in what he built from nothing in the years that followed, is the clearest answer I have ever found to the question that every person who has ever lost something financially significant eventually asks. What do you do when everything is gone? The island of Cyprus in the 4th century BC was one of the great crossroads of the ancient Mediterranean world. Positioned between Greece, the Levant, and Egypt, it sat at the intersection of three of the most significant trading cultures of antiquity. Phoenician merchants had settled there for generations. Greek culture had overlaid the Phoenician foundation. Egyptian influence moved through the port cities with the grain ships. It was a place where a merchant with ambition and connections could build genuine wealth. Not the aristocratic wealth of land and inheritance, but the dynamic, active, risk-bearing wealth of trade. The wealth that required you to put something into the sea and trust the sea to return it multiplied. Zeno was born in Citium, a port city on the southern coast of Cyprus, around 334 BC. His father, Nasias, was a merchant. The family was Phoenician by heritage, Greek by culture, and shaped entirely by the world of commerce. From childhood, Zeno would have understood the rhythms of trade, the loading of ships, the calculation of margins, the management of credit and debt, and the relationship between risk and return that every merchant lives inside. He was, by every account, a serious young man, not given to the social pleasures that occupied most of his contemporaries. Physically slight, dark-complexioned, preferring olives and simple food to the banquets that wealthy Cypriot society provided. His biographer, Diogenes Laertius, describes him as reserved, almost severe, a person whose interior life was clearly richer than his exterior presentation suggested. But he was also, unmistakably, a merchant. His father traded in purple dye, one of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world, extracted from sea snails found along the Phoenician coast and worth its weight in silver. Zeno grew up understanding value, scarcity, and the relationship between knowledge and commercial advantage. He knew how markets worked from the inside, the way only people who have grown up inside them can know. Around 312 BC, when Zeno was in his early 20s, he loaded a ship with a cargo of purple dye, his father's inventory, possibly his inheritance, certainly a significant portion of whatever financial foundation the family had built, and set sail for Athens. Athens was, at this moment, the intellectual and commercial capital of the Greek world, the city of Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, the city where philosophy had become not just an elite pursuit, but a genuine public culture, where ideas were debated in the agora, where teachers gathered students in the gymnasia, where the life of the mind had acquired a prestige that drew serious young people from across the Mediterranean world. Why Zeno was going to Athens is not entirely clear from the ancient sources. Perhaps purely for trade. Perhaps with some ambition toward the philosophical education that Athens uniquely offered. Perhaps simply because Athens was where a serious young merchant with intellectual inclinations naturally pointed himself. He never arrived with his cargo. The details of the shipwreck are sparse. Ancient sources mention it, but do not dwell on the mechanics. What we know is that somewhere between Cyprus and Athens, the ship carrying Zeno and his cargo went down. The purple dye, worth a fortune, representing years of his family's labor and capital, sank to the bottom of the sea. Zeno survived. He arrived in Athens with nothing, not with reduced means, not with a portion of what he had, with nothing. No cargo, no capital, no letters of credit, no commercial relationships in a city where he was unknown. Nothing but himself, his education, and whatever his father had built into him during the years of watching and learning in the merchant world of Cyprus. Ancient sources preserve two accounts of what happened next, and both may be true. In one version, Zeno sat down on the shore and wept. In the other, he said, "Fortune treats me well. She drives me to philosophy." The two accounts are not contradictory. A man can weep and then, through the weeping, find clarity. The grief and the insight are not opposites. They are sequential. And the sequence, the movement from grief to clarity to purposeful action, is the financial lesson hiding inside the shipwreck story. He had not yet articulated that. He had not yet built the philosophy. He was just a young man, soaking wet, standing in a foreign city with nothing. But the shape of what he would spend his life building was already present in that moment, in the decision, conscious or not, to treat the loss as information rather than a verdict. Catastrophic loss is not the end of a financial story. It is, in many cases, the beginning of a better one. The question is never whether the loss was real. It was real. The question is what posture you bring to what comes after. Zeno's shipwreck is the origin story of the most enduring philosophical tradition in Western history. What is the origin story of your greatest financial loss? Athens in 312 BC was not the Athens of Pericles' golden age. In that era, the construction of the Parthenon, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, and the political experiment of Athenian democracy at its most ambitious were all a century past. The city had been humbled by war, reshaped by Macedonian conquest, and diminished in political power. But intellectually, Athens was still the center of the world. The philosophical schools founded in the previous century continue to operate and attract students. The Platonic Academy, the Lyceum of the Aristotelian tradition, the Epicurean Garden, these were living institutions, not monuments to a past era. And around them, in the Agora and its surrounding streets, a culture of philosophical discussion had taken root that was unlike anything anywhere else in the ancient world. Books, hand-copied scrolls, were sold in the Agora. This is the detail that changes everything. Diogenes Laertius, writing several centuries later and drawing on earlier sources, tells the story this way. Zeno, newly arrived in Athens and stripped of his commercial purpose, wandered into a bookshop in the Agora. He picked up a copy of the Memorabilia, Xenophon's account of Socrates' life and teachings. He began reading, and he asked the bookseller where he could find men like the ones described in the book. At that moment, Crates of Thebes, a cynic philosopher, one of the most colorful and unconventional figures in Athenian philosophical life, happened to walk past. The bookseller pointed at him. Zeno followed. He studied under Crates for years, then under other teachers, Stilpo of Megara, Polemo of the Academy. He absorbed everything he encountered. He was not a passive student. Ancient sources describe him as relentlessly questioning, difficult to satisfy, always pushing past the accepted answer toward whatever lay beneath it. Zeno spent approximately 20 years studying in Athens before he began teaching under his own name. 20 years of being a student, of having no independent income from philosophy, of living simply. The ancient sources describe a life of remarkable austerity, not from poverty of spirit, but from genuine preference. He ate figs and drank water. He slept on the ground. He wore the same cloak in winter and summer. And financially, this is the part that is directly relevant to everyone watching. Those 20 years were the investment period. The long, unsexy, unremarkable accumulation phase during which nothing visible was happening, but everything important was being built. The compounding was intellectual rather than financial, but the structure was identical. Small, consistent, daily deposits into a system that would eventually produce returns of an entirely different scale than the deposits themselves. Well-being is attained little by little, and nevertheless, it is no little thing. He said that, and he lived it. For 20 years, before anyone outside a small circle of Athenian philosophers knew his name. Here is something that almost no account of Zeno's life examines honestly. The philosophy he eventually built, Stoicism, bears the unmistakable imprint of a merchant's mind. The emphasis on what is genuinely valuable versus what merely appears valuable. That is a merchant's question. The distinction between things in your control and things outside it. That is a trader's risk framework. The focus on long-time horizons and the indifference to short-term volatility. That is the psychology of someone who has put cargo on a ship and watched it sail away, knowing the return might be years away and is not guaranteed. The shipwreck did not destroy the merchant. It redirected him. And the philosophy that emerged from that redirection was richer for having been built by someone who understood, from personal experience, what it felt like to have everything and then nothing, and what it meant to build again from scratch. Wealth is a tool for wisdom, not an end. Zeno's greatest commercial asset was not the purple dye that sank with his ship. It was the merchant's mind he carried ashore, the ability to think clearly about value, risk, and long-term horizons. That mind, redirected, built something worth more than any cargo. The question is not what you lost. The question is what you carried ashore. Around 300 BC, after 2 decades of study, Zeno began teaching publicly in Athens. He chose a specific location, the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, a colonnaded walkway on the northern edge of the agora, decorated with famous paintings of Athenian military victories. The choice was significant. The other philosophical schools of Athens operated in private spaces. The Academy was a garden outside the city walls, the Lyceum a gymnasium, the Epicurean school a private garden whose motto was, "Do not enter if you are not prepared to stay." They were, in different ways, exclusive. Zeno taught in public, in a space that anyone could enter, where merchants and politicians and craftsmen and visitors from across the Mediterranean passed through every day. He was not selecting an elite audience. He was making the philosophy available to everyone willing to stop and listen. The good life, Zeno taught, consists of aligning yourself completely with what is in your power, developing virtue, cultivating wisdom, practicing right action, and holding everything else with open hands. Not indifference in the sense of not caring. Indifference in the sense of not allowing the things outside your control to determine your well-being. Stoicism spread across the ancient world with a speed that surprised even its practitioners. Within a generation of Zeno's death, it had reached Rome. Within 2 generations, it was the philosophy of choice for the Roman ruling class. Within 3, it had shaped the thinking of emperors. Sit with what Zeno built for a moment and let its financial parallel become clear. He lost his entire portfolio in a single catastrophic event. He spent 20 years in what looked, from the outside, like an unremarkable accumulation phase. No visible returns, no external markers of success. He built on a foundation of intellectual capital, skills, frameworks, and ways of seeing rather than material capital. And he created something that generated returns for 2,500 years after his death, in a form that no sea and no emperor could ever take. The investor who loses everything in a market crash and rebuilds slowly, patiently, on sounder foundations, not chasing the returns that tempted them into the original loss, but building on what they understand, what they genuinely know, what they can actually manage. That investor is following Zeno's path without knowing it. The professional who loses a career, an industry, a business, who spends years in what feels like a going nowhere period of rebuilding, and who uses that time to develop genuine expertise rather than performing the appearance of recovery. That person is standing in the Stoa Poikile, teaching in public, building something that compounds invisibly until it does not. Starting over with nothing is sometimes the greatest financial advantage because it removes the option of protecting what you had at the expense of building what you need. Zeno could not protect the cargo, so he built the philosophy. What you build after loss, on genuine foundations, with clear eyes and a patient timeline, is almost always worth more than what the loss took. Zeno died in Athens around 262 BC, in his 70s, having taught at the Stoa Poikile for nearly 40 years. The ancient sources describe his death with the same quality that characterizes his life: deliberate, unhurried, and entirely on his own terms. He left behind no great written works. The texts he produced have not survived intact. He left behind no fortune. The man who arrived in Athens with nothing chose to leave with something similarly unencumbered. He left behind a school, a tradition, and a set of ideas that were already spreading beyond anything he could have imagined when he first walked into the bookshop in the Agora. He left behind Cleanthes, who succeeded him and kept the school alive through difficult years. Cleanthes left behind Chrysippus, who systematized the philosophy into the rigorous framework that allowed it to spread. Chrysippus's work reached Rome, where it shaped Panaetius, who taught Posidonius, who taught the generation that produced Cicero. From Cicero's Rome to the generation of Seneca, from Seneca to Epictetus, from Epictetus to Marcus Aurelius. Across 4 acts, 3 financial truths emerge from Zeno's story with the clarity of things that have been tested and have held. The first truth, catastrophic loss, is not a verdict, it is a redirection. Zeno's shipwreck was objectively catastrophic. The cargo was real, the loss was real, the financial consequences were real and lasting. But the loss did not determine what came after it. His response determined that. The posture he brought to the morning after the shipwreck, the willingness to treat the loss as information rather than a conclusion, to ask what is available to me now rather than mourning what is gone. That posture is available to every person who has ever experienced a financial catastrophe. The question after a financial loss is never only what I lost, It is equally, what did I carry ashore? What capabilities, what understanding, what relationships, what ways of thinking survived the wreck intact? And what can be built from those foundations? The second truth. Wealth is a tool for wisdom, not an end. Zeno's father built wealth through the purple dye trade. Zeno inherited that wealth, put it on a ship, and lost it. And in losing it, discovered something his father's trade could never have given him: the understanding that the point of wealth, when examined honestly, is always the freedom and capacity it enables, not the wealth itself. The person who accumulates money for its own sake is, in Zeno's terms, confused about the relationship between the tool and its purpose. Money is extraordinarily useful. It buys time, reduces constraint, creates options, and enables the kind of life that most people would choose if they could. But money mistaken for the thing itself, pursued for its own sake, used as a measure of personal worth, accumulated beyond the point of usefulness, becomes a different kind of poverty. Zeno knew this not from theory, but from experience. He had held the wealth, he had lost his wealth, and he had found in the loss that the thing he valued, the freedom to think, to learn, to teach, to live in agreement with what he believed, was available to him with almost nothing. That discovery did not make him indifferent to wealth. It made its purpose clear to him. The third truth. The greatest financial advantage of starting over is the freedom to build correctly. When you have existing wealth to protect, every new financial decision is constrained by the obligation to preserve what already exists. You cannot take the risks that a clean slate permits. You cannot build on entirely new foundations because the old ones are still load-bearing. You can't completely redirect because that would require dismantling what you have already built. Zeno faced no such constraints. The shipwreck erased them all instantly. The philosophy he created from the ground up, with no existing framework to maintain and no sunk costs to defend, was clearer, more precise, and more lasting than anything that could have been built step by step on his existing business background. This does not mean financial catastrophe is desirable. It is not. But it does mean that the person who has experienced genuine financial loss and is standing in the aftermath, looking at what remains, has access to a kind of clarity that incremental success rarely provides. The question is whether they use that clarity, or whether they spend their energy trying to reconstruct exactly what was there before. Wealth without wisdom is cargo on a ship, real and valuable, right up until the moment the sea takes it. Wisdom without wealth is Zeno on the shore, temporarily displaced, but carrying everything that matters. The goal is both, and the path to both, in Zeno's life, as in the philosophy he built, runs through the clear-eyed acceptance of what is genuinely in your control, and the equally clear-eyed release of what is not. A merchant, a shipwreck, a bookshop in Athens, 20 years of invisible accumulation, 40 years of teaching in public, a philosophy that spread across the ancient world and survived everything the ancient world could throw at it: wars, empires, the fall of Rome, 1,000 years of medieval Europe, the Renaissance, the modern era, and arrived here, intact, still saying the same thing it said on the shores of the Athenian Agora 2,300 years ago. Some things are in your control. Some things are not. Build your life on the first list. Hold the second with open hands. That is the financial philosophy of disciplined wealth. It is also, in its deepest form, the only honest answer to the question that every person who has ever faced genuine financial difficulty eventually asks: what do I do when everything is gone? You walk into a bookshop. You ask where you can find people like the ones in the pages, and you begin. Thank you for being here for 10 episodes, for the comments, the shares, the messages from people who told me this channel changed something in how they think about money. That means more than any metric. If Zeno's story landed somewhere real for you, share it. With someone who has lost something. With someone who is standing on a shore right now, wondering what comes next. This might be exactly what they need to hear. Subscribe to Disciplined Wealth. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you are building from whatever wreckage life has handed you. I will read every single one. And I will see you in the next episode.